Welcome to meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on Thursday, November 25th, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times. Must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer in the room. Please refrain from coming to the room if you are symptomatic. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute and your camera must be on. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, May 4th, 2022, we will resume consideration of Bill C-242, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, temporary resident visas for parents and grandparents. Today, we will be hearing from the witnesses in this first panel on Bill C-242. On behalf of the members of the committee, I would like to welcome our witnesses for today's meeting. Today, we are joined by Howard Ramos, Professor, Chair of the Department of Sociology from Western University. We are also joined by Arthur Sweetman, Professor, McMaster University. So I would like to welcome the witnesses, and witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will go into round of questioning. So we will begin with Howard Ramos, the Professor, Chair of the Department of Sociology, Western University. Mr. Ramos, you can please begin. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Bonjour, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to present to this committee. The remarks that I will share with you are based on research that I conducted on parent and grandparent immigrants published in the Journal of Canadian Ethnic Studies in 2012. And it looks at what do parents and grandparents contribute, as well as some observations on demographic and policy issues related to newcomers and their extended family. In talking with you, there are 3 basic points that I would like to share. The first is that parents and grandparents make significant economic contributions to Canadian society, as well as non-economic ones that are often overlooked in the discussion. Second, newcomers are highly mobile and skilled, offering a viable means for them to be with their elders and extended family will anchor them in their communities. 3, when considering improving access to family through super visas, it's important to consider the pragmatics of the visa option versus more long-term options to gain permanent residency. So let me expand on each of these 3 points. First, the research I conducted with Medina Vanderplat and Yoko Yoshida in the Journal of Canadian Ethnic Studies recognizes that Canada has increasingly favored immigration policies based on human capital theory, as well as economic outcomes, often at the cost of other pathways. While immigration is on the increase, there's been a downward trend in the number of family class entrants admitted to the country over the last few decades. The group most affected is sponsored parents and/or grandparents, who are also the most vulnerable to criticism against family class immigration. Largely, the discussion on family class immigration is centered on the perceived lack of potential economic contributions of these immigrants. Such a focus, however, overlooks the feminized nature of this type of migration and the many non-economic contributions that immigrants make. Using multinomial logistic regression of the longitudinal survey of immigrants to Canada, we examined both the economic and non-economic impacts and contributions of sponsored parents and grandparents compared to immigrants of a similar age migrating under other immigration categories. What we found was that sponsored parents and grandparents make significant economic contributions to Canadian society, as well as non-economic ones. Many of the parents and grandparents actually take up paid employment, and this increases over their duration in Canada. We also found that parents and grandparents make a number of non-economic contributions, such as caring for family and offering related family supports. This is in line with other research that shows that Family migrants help with emotional support, childcare, elder care, and helping the household in cases more generally. And in the cases of small business, often help out with small businesses as well. Our research also showed that parent and grandparent immigrants are younger than most people expect. The average age was roughly 60 years old for both the parents and the grandparents combined. What this means is that many of the parents who come to Canada are in their 50s, and some are even into their mid to late 40s when newcomers are younger. And this means that they have quite a bit of working life left in their careers if they choose to pursue them. The second point that I want to emphasize is that given the supportive roles that parents and grandparents offer newcomers, they potentially play an anchoring role which will help newcomers put down more long-term roots in their community. Research shows that once a person has migrated, they are more likely to migrate again. Canada attracts highly skilled newcomers who have the options to move within Canada, but they also are highly mobile and have the option to move outside of Canada. As people age and their parents and grandparents also age, this creates a pull factor for newcomers to leave the country to tend to their parents and or grandparents. Having the opportunity to have parents or grandparents join newcomers creates an anchor effect. It removes that pull factor that might draw them out of the country. It is also an anchor in that parents and grandparents are often less mobile than their children because of their age and other socioeconomic factors. This can potentially play an important role in anchoring newcomers to communities that experience high outrates of migration, such as those in Atlantic Canada, the prairies, rural communities, or even in the north. The third point that I want to expand on is something that you already know, which is sponsoring and connecting with family is one of the biggest concerns newcomers face after they arrive in Canada.
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Ramos. Your time is up. Maybe you will have an opportunity to talk further in the round of questioning. We will now proceed to Mr. Sweetman, Professor McMaster University. Mr. Sweetman, you can please begin. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you for inviting me to address this committee. Allowing parents and grandparents to travel to Canada is clearly beneficial to their families. My comments today, therefore, focus on a few insurance-related issues that will likely need to be addressed, or at least considered, assuming this bill moves forward. That is, the matters I will raise are forward-looking and concern implementation. My comments focus on the health insurance required by current ministerial instruction, although this may have implications for other aspects of the bill. The insurance focuses on emergency care and is required to be valid for at least 1 year from the date of entry. Indeed, my understanding is that in practice, it's difficult to purchase this insurance for a period of longer than 1 year at present. If a stay lasts longer than 1 year, then the insurance needs to be renewed or new insurance purchased. At present, as I understand it, the federal government does not monitor renewals and related issues. The purpose of insurance is to pool payments and costs so as to reduce risk. However, one risk that's not mitigated in the current framework is the year-to-year risk. Although we hope this does not occur if, for example, a parent or a grandparent experiences an expensive health event in the first year of a stay, the price of insurance in the second year would almost certainly be much higher. This risk is perhaps manageable for a 2-year stay, but if the duration of the stay is increased, the risk of a very large year-to-year increase in health insurance prices grows. If the length of stay is to be increased, the non-trivial risk associated with large price increases for insurance renewal needs to be considered now. One option would be to require a longer minimum period of coverage. Indeed, the coverage could be for the full length of the stay with an opt-out clause for parents and grandparents who decide to return home early. Of course, payment need not be upfront. I can imagine various alternative sets of requirements regarding the structure of multi-year contracts. Perhaps, for example, minimum price increases across the years could be required as a prerequisite for ministerial approval. This would give some amount of multi-year certainty to the sponsoring families as well as their parents and grandparents. Obviously, this goes well beyond the text of the legislation, but the issues, even if you disagree with my points for discussion, are ramifications of the proposed legislation. And they're going to likely be quite important for some families and are best considered in advance. As an economist, I'm all in favor of competition to bring down prices to the benefit of consumers. A key issue in expanding health insurance purchase options to include international competitors is to ensure that the change achieves its desired goal with minimal negative side effects. As a health economist, I recognize that one of the strengths of Canadian healthcare is that it has modest administrative costs. If the new extended stay super visas insurance market is not well designed and regulated, then the associated administrative costs might increase noticeably, and the legislation's goal of reducing insurance costs for consumers might be partly or even largely undone. In particular, one way that insurers in some jurisdictions seek to keep insurance prices low is to, how shall I say this, interact rather aggressively with healthcare providers. Canadian hospitals and other healthcare providers have limited experience with aggressive insurance providers. Such activities increase administrative costs. In considering implementation, someone needs to think very carefully about guidelines for the minister-approved list of insurers that are appropriate for the Canadian context so as not to generate excessive administrative costs, since in the end, I expect that those buying insurance for parents and grandparents and/or Canadian taxpayers would need to pay such administrative costs. Finally, my expectation is that adding insurance companies to the proposed ministerial list of approved firms will not be nearly as difficult as removing such companies for cause. Anyone developing guidelines for adding insurers to some approved list needs to think carefully and again in advance about the process of removing insurers from the list. One challenge is that this requires monitoring non-payment and related issues, which requires the cooperation of provincial governments. Of course, any insurance guidelines for foreign, especially American and Mexican insurers, needs to meet all the requirements of USMCA and other trade agreements. This could also have important implications for Canadian insurers. In conclusion, my view is that good intentions do not on their own make good policy. Careful and diligent advanced planning and high-quality execution are also usually required. I am attempting to think about some of the challenges that might arise where advanced planning can improve outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetman. We will now proceed to our round of questioning. We will begin our first round with Mr. Seebeck. Mr. Seebeck, you can begin. You will have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Ramos, when you talk about the significant economic benefits of parents and grandparents, when you look at the low-income cutoff, which seems to suggest that parents and grandparents are in fact an economic burden on Canadian society, what would you say about that?
I'm so glad you asked that question because that was part of the third point that I wasn't able to share, which is one of the assumptions we make about parents and grandparents is that they're dependent. Whereas when we look at the migrants who are coming, they're often coming from upper middle class backgrounds, from professional backgrounds, often have parents with a considerable degree of wealth. And we need to begin to question whether or not we should be looking at the sponsor alone or also looking at the wealth and viability of the parents when they come. As for many of the parents, especially for migrants coming from India or China, they have considerable wealth before they come to Canada. So I think it's important to look at both sides of the equation and not look at simply the assumption that the newcomer is going to be sponsoring their parent, but that the parent actually could be sponsoring the newcomer as much as the other way around.
And even if it's not part of what this bill, I hope, looks at is that when someone is very new to Canada, they may have not achieved the economic success of others. And they're the people who I think are most affected by the low-income cutoff. So I really want to get your view that, do you think the low-income cutoff actually provides any protection to Canadians? Or is Canada at risk if a family has a $30,000 annual income and they bring their parent or grandparent here?
Well, that's a very important point to make, which is newcomers face a labor market disruption when they land in Canada, and it often takes a number of years to overcome that gap. One of the issues with the LICO is it's also pinned to the number of people in the household. And so the more people you have in the household, the more restrictive that becomes. So I think it's very prudent to be able to begin to question whether that's an appropriate check and balance. And I think that, as I was saying before, one of the ways to look at that is to look at the wealth of the actual parent migrating as well.
Thanks for that. One other thing, and I'm wondering if you looked at this. I haven't had the pleasure of reading any of your papers. New Canadians across the cultural spectrum, they will often make remittances back to their home countries. In fact, I know there's significant remittances. I was having a discussion with the ambassador from Kosovo last night, and somewhere in the nature, I think he said somewhere in the nature of $2 to $3 billion a year come back into Kosovo from remittances outside the country, right? So I'm sure that's happening here in Canada. Have you ever factored that in, the fact that having parents and grandparents here for extended periods of time would mean those remittances are not going back to the country of origin, and therefore there's an additional economic benefit here in Canada by keeping those funds here?
In my own research, I haven't looked at remittances, but I would say that the logic that you present would be a strong hypothesis that I think would be shown correct if we were able to look at that. And part of the difficulty in looking at remittances is largely because of how we construct our data. We largely look at people once they're here rather than looking at flows with their broader family abroad, as well as their flows in and out of Canada. So I can only speculate, but I suspect that you'd probably find that that would be true.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sweetman, you're talking about some insurance-related issues, but if I were to take the gist of what you're saying is that prudent planning by the government would resolve most, if not all, of the concerns that you raised in your opening statement.
Yes, I think that's true. My advocacy is for that kind of prudent advanced planning. And if I can go back to your first question to Mr. Ramos, I think my first main point addresses that question directly, that the 1 year term for insurance right now imposes very substantial risk on low-income families. Because if there is, but by virtue of having 1 year insurance, the major cost increase that they might experience in a second or third or fourth year of a visit would be a very substantial increase in the insurance premium that they need to pay. That's exactly the kind of risk that I'd like to mitigate, so that people know right from the beginning how much they need to pay for the entire length of the stay.
Okay. And right now, many of these risks exist. As you pointed out, if someone had 1 year insurance and stayed for 2 years, that risk currently exists. And
yes, it does.
And under the current super visa, that 2 year stay can be extended.
Yes.
So the risk of having a longer stay, which is what's proposed in my bill, it substantially already exists now. Would you agree with that?
So it does to some extent. At the renewal, I think you need to prove insurance once again, if I'm not mistaken, so that there is a verification of insurance at a certain point. So this risk is in some sense about protecting the parents and grandparents and their sponsors, and in some sense pooling risk to their advantage.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Al-Khouri. Mr. Al-Khouri, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et bienvenue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to our guests, our witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Sweetman. Mr. Sweetman, you have stated in your opening statement that you favor more competition, even international competition, and that the fees shouldn't be paid ahead of time for insurance, and that this such things ultimately wind up being paid out of pockets of consumers. So how will we be able to ensure a balance? Will there be several companies who are well recognized outside of Canada who will not accept the terms we would like, who will want to be paid in advance? How will we find a balance here? Strike a balance.
I think that you're raising exactly the questions that I was raising. I think that striking that balance is not something that we're going to solve in a half-hour discussion now. It's going to take a lot of work by people who are specialists. But I think we can do that. I think in my view, what the minister should do is have his staff, have people in the department set up potential guidelines, criteria, if you like, for any insurance company anywhere to meet in order to be on his approved list of qualified insurance companies for this purpose. And in part, it's not only about criteria for being on the list, it's also the process or the criteria for being removed from the list simultaneously. So I don't actually think that we should go out and solicit companies. We should rather post criteria, and anyone who meets the criteria could potentially be on the list. And then the goal is to intelligently and carefully design those criteria for the benefit of Canadians and for the super visa holders when they visit Canada.
Mr. Sweetman,
Mr. Sweetman, based on what you're telling us now, and in your opinion, based on your experience in this area, what are the barriers to accepting a broader range of options for insurance coverage outside of Canada? What do you think the main barriers to that approach would be?
One of the barriers, and that is that some insurance companies in some jurisdictions, and we only need to look just a little bit further south of us to see that in practice, insurance companies are very active in telling hospitals and other healthcare providers what they should be doing. That's not part of the Canadian norm, and that would be a real shock for our healthcare system. Similarly, some providers debate whether or not certain payments should be made. Again, those increase administrative costs. So we need to be very careful about designing a system that minimizes those types of debates. We also need to be worried about the sort of the credibility, the size, the respectability of the insurance companies in question. But again, I think that there are appropriate mechanisms that could be put in place to assure that kind of quality for insurance companies from many places around the world.
Merci. Monsieur Ramos.
Thank you. Mr. Ramos, in this bill, Bill C-242, seems to be addressing the matter of financial stability of people who are at issue here. As far as you know, do you think that it is reasonable and actually addresses the problem?
I think that it's important in the conversation to really think about the demographics of those who would be able to access the super visas. And so I think that it's a very viable solution for people who have citizenship or whose parents and grandparents have citizenships in countries that do not allow dual citizenship. I think it's a very viable process for families that have wealth on both sides from the newcomer as well as the family. And I think that that's the piece of the puzzle that seems to be a little bit missed, which is to think about changing the narrative to really also begin to consider the benefits that the parents and grandparents are bringing rather than just the deficits, as I think that the deficits overlook a lot of the positive aspects that parents and grandparents would be bringing.
I would like
to hear from both of you, Mr. Ramos and Mr. Sweetman, your general opinion of this bill. Will it have a positive effect or a negative effect? What do you think? And I'm speaking generally.
Why don't you go first?
I would say that there is a potential for much positive impact. As I was mentioning before, the anchoring that can happen for newcomers would be a huge positive impact in terms of supporting families and bringing them together.
And my view, I think, is in the closing part of my opening statement, that this bill is well-intentioned, but good intentions are not sufficient for good policy. that I think this bill could be beneficial if it's well implemented and carefully thought through. It's all in the execution.
Thank you. My time is finished.
Mr. Al-Khoury, we will now proceed to Mr. Brunel-Dessep. Mr. Brunel-Dessep, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is very interesting. Well, to begin, hello to our witnesses. Welcome. But what you were saying, Mr. Sweetman, is truly interesting, and I've been listening to you carefully. We can see that a good deal of work should be done to frame the involvement of foreign insurers, for example. But are we just moving too fast here? Shouldn't we be, providing a framework for them? That's a good idea. But shouldn't we set up that framework before we adopt this bill? I mean, are we missing a step, like really importantly? What do you think?
Well, I don't know what you mean by adopt the bill, since you're only talking about passing it in the House. It needs to be proclaimed, and I presume that prior to it being proclaimed, that there would be appropriate background material, appropriate guidelines put in place. Or I hope, at least, maybe I should say, rather than saying I assume, I hope, and I would advocate for proper guidelines being put in place before the bill is proclaimed.
OK. Donc, vous répondez.
Yes, indeed. So that's a good answer. Indeed, the bill wouldn't be passed right away or proclaimed right away, but you're saying that we would need to work ahead of time before we pass it, basically, or before it comes into effect. So that's a good answer. Thank you. Mr. Ramos, the Times extended stay super visas will allow for permanent residence matters to be handled in better time, but members of the family, some leave Canada after their visit is over. So, look, this is the dual intent issue. Do you think that that is problematic, a problem in our immigration system here in Canada? On one side, we're saying it's going to be easier to ask for permanent resident for visa holders. On the other hand, you say we're going to give you these super visas in as much as you're going to assure us that you're going to be heading home soon and leaving Canada. So is this contradictory?
And I think that one of the considerations is to really think about how does the super visa work in concert with more permanent pathways for family. And I think it's important to begin to think about who are the people who could transition into a more permanent element, and there certainly are contradictions in the current version of the draft. I mean, another consideration that's very much related is how you can apply for that super visa. My understanding is it can only be applied for outside of the country. So I think that if the goal is to truly free up, it's to allow also for people who may be on another type of visa or may be in the country through the 6-month allowance that many countries have with Canada to then apply as well. So I think that more thought could be offered in terms of how does it relate to permanent pathways and not just in isolation. So I think that's an important consideration.
Merci pour cette réponse.
Thank you for your answer. Back to you, Mr. Ramos. Some criticize saying that immigration, IRCC, is too demanding, expecting that a family's income does not change from year to year and that it never falls below the necessary minimum set, even during times of recession. So these requirements created by Sections 4 and 5 of C242, will this solve this? Because, of course, it can be a problem for some families.
I think in terms of the implications at different points of implementation, certainly in recession, newcomers face unique obstacles, and so with their family. But I think that it's important for us to also not to be short-sighted and only look at the immediate, and to recognize that this is a potential long-term investment. If it means that families are more likely to stay in regions that have high out-migration, and it's a policy that helps curb the current system for permanent sponsorship, where I believe it's about 25,000 slots for parents and grandparents at this point, which is tiny when you contrast that against the 400,000 newcomers we admit a year. and you compound that over many years, this is a stopgap that potentially can help a lot of families and can help smaller regions maintain their newcomers. So it's important for us to not only look at the immediate points of recession or ups and downturns in an economy that might be a year or two, but also think, what does it mean if we keep families in regions for the long term and invest in them? And it's really their children and their grandchildren that will be the true benefit to Canada and Quebec.
Merci. Il me reste une minute. Écoutez.
Thank you. I have 1 minute left. To the best of your knowledge, Mr. Ramos, in 2016, an attorney told us that it's difficult for people whose partners have died to use the super visas because IRCC is convinced that the grandparents and parents will leave at the end of the period allowed for. So back to C242, the 5-year stay period, what will the effect be on super visa applicants who are already have lost their spouses or are in vulnerable positions?
30 seconds, but I would say that this is echoing Mr. Sweetman, why thorough investigation before implementation is needed to work out some of these considerations.
Au témoin.
Okay, thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Seaback. Ms. Kwan. Will now, Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes for your opening for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for their presentations. The Super Visa program, of course, was a program that was brought about from the previous administration as a means to allow for parents and grandparents to reunite because they could not get permanent residence status. That's the reality. And the program is set up in such a way so that ostensibly, Canada would not be deemed to be having to pay for or support these parents and grandparents. And so hence the barriers that exist, whether it be the income barrier or the insurance requirements, which is extremely onerous for a lot of families. That is the reality. So Mr. Seaback here is trying to address some of those shortfalls with his bill. To make it a little bit more palatable, I guess, for parents and grandparents and more affordable for them to be able to utilize this stream to come to Canada to reunite with their loved ones. So it is not without problems. But with that being said, a lot of people welcome this opportunity because otherwise they would not have any opportunity at all to reunite with their loved ones. So from that perspective, one thing that I have taken issue with for a very long time now is this. The government, despite many requests in previous committee with CIMM, we've asked the government to evaluate and to conduct research into the contributions of parents and grandparents beyond the dollar figure, their contributions in terms of cultural, social support, and even economic support here in Canada, because they come as a visitor, they spend money here, and they do all kinds of things here to which contribute, I would argue, to our economy. So from that perspective, I guess my first question is to Mr. Ramos. What are your thoughts on that in terms of that calculation and those contributions that are not accounted for? Should the government be undertaking this work to make sure that we account for that, and that as an offset towards the costs that are being applied to them in this Super Visa program?
In short, yes. There's a deep need for research on this front. I think that we often tend to focus on economic issues, and on that front, we can do some investigation using the linked data to the longitudinal survey of immigrants to the IMDb data, but there isn't another longitudinal study of immigrants such as the one that I used in 2012 that offered some insights. The qualitative research that's out there done by academics does show that there is much mental health support, language support, child care support, elder care support. The work we did showed some evidence of care and support, but it didn't break it down. So in this sense, it's really important to do this. One of the obstacles researchers face, however, is that most of the data sets are based on individual newcomers rather than thinking about newcomers as family units. So it makes it not only difficult to try and see what's the relationship to parents and grandparents, but also to see the relationship with the children of newcomers who are here in Canada. So in my view, it would be good to invest in better research into families as a whole, both for newcomers and for those who are Canadian as well by birth.
Well, thank you for that response. This question was put to officials when they were before the committee about needing to conduct that research, and their response generally centers around how difficult it is, so therefore, basically, they haven't done it. Is that a lame excuse?
I think it's a legitimate excuse, but at the same time, it will always be an excuse unless investments are made to build the data to do that research. So from a pragmatic sense, can it be done quickly tomorrow? No, there are the obstacles that I mentioned. But is it something worth investing in if we're going to be attracting 400,000 newcomers a year? And we think holistically about different interventions rather than in the short term, then yes, this is an investment that's worth investing in.
Yeah, so this study was done actually in the 2015 term and was asked of the government, so 5-6 years ago now. And of course, I'm pretty sure that before my time, this was requested of the government, and still that hasn't been done. And so fair enough to say successive governments have not undertaken this work. So as long as the idea that it is difficult to achieve, so therefore we're not going to do it, as long as that perspective persists, we will never get the data, and we will always be walking around in a circle with respect to that. And I don't know how many more years we'll have to pass before we actually do the work that is so necessary. So I guess my final question then to you, Mr. Ramos, is this. Can you just tell us, is it possible for this work to be done?
It is certainly possible for the work to be done. I think that there is some stuff that can be done more immediately, looking at some of the economic impacts and some of the high-level caring impacts, as was done in the research that we published in 2012. But I think that it really is a matter of investing in looking at holistic measures, looking at well-being. And as the pandemic has showed us, the intersections that exist across different dimensions of society. So it's time for us to stop looking at just the economic factors of migration and start looking at the other dimensions as well.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to Mr. Speedman for a minute. With respect to, I guess, insurance coverage, you spoke about insurance coverage for providers outside of the country. But there's a question to be asked in terms of potentially for insurance to be provided by the provinces. So that is to say, for the parent or grandparent to purchase insurance coverage with the respective province or territory. Oh, my time is up. I guess I have to come back.
Yeah. Ms. Kwan, your time is up. We will now proceed again back to Mr. Seebeck. Mr. Seebeck, you will have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Well, Mr. Speedman, first I'll give you the opportunity to answer Ms. Kwan's question.
So I think that's actually an interesting possibility. The one thing I would say is it's usually the case that someone says what she said at a committee like this, that is to say the provinces should do it. If you want to offer that insurance, the federal government could equally offer that insurance. In fact, in many ways, it would be more natural and easier and perhaps have less administrative costs if the federal government offered the insurance instead of the province. At the moment, if I can go a little bit beyond that, the real question with the super visa is who pays for healthcare, right? And if someone comes under the parent and grandparent scheme, then all of Canada pays for healthcare. And under the super visa, the sponsoring family and the parents and grandparents themselves pay for healthcare. It doesn't need to be a 0-1. It could be somewhere in between. There are other options that we could consider as a society. Something in between government pays 100% or government pays 0. So I think there are a range of things we could think about. I'm not sure that we've been very creative.
Thanks for that. I've really appreciated your insights on the insurance. My goal in this is try and find ways to make it more affordable. So I've appreciated your comments. I want to ask you this one thing, though. The bill actually says that a health insurance policy purchased from an insurance company outside Canada that is approved by the minister. So you were saying that before this is proclaimed in force, they could get all this straightened out. But in fact, they wouldn't have to do it before it was proclaimed in force, because if it's not approved by the minister, they could approve nothing. Or they could take 6 months after it's proclaimed, or they could take 2 years to make sure that they got it right. You'd agree with that?
That's true. I mean, they can take as long as they want. It's not clear under NAFTA, or not NAFTA, USMCA and other trade agreements, what happens once you pass this legislation which allows international competition, and then the minister says it's the only people we're going to continue to allow, because I'm presuming you're not going to shut down the program while we wait for the minister. So the only people we allow are Canadian firms. You might find yourself facing several complaints from, for example, American and Mexican insurers very quickly if the minister delays. Again, I'm not a trade expert. I'm not a trade lawyer. I think you would need to talk to a trade lawyer about this, but you might find yourself running afoul of USMCA if the minister took too long to produce a list once the legislation had passed.
Okay. And I'll share my time with Mr. Genis.
Thank you, Mr. Seebeck. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. So, Mr. Ramos, I was really intrigued by sort of this broader discussion of the economic benefits of non-economic immigration categories. And it's sort of odd in some ways the way we think about immigration, which is where we have the economic stream for economic benefit, and then we have the family stream, and we have the refugee stream, and each of them have clear specific benefits. But I don't know that we discuss enough or acknowledge the fact that that one category can also achieve objectives in another category. You can have a refugee who comes for economic reasons, but also is seeking refuge, and those things and how they go together. I wonder if you could just speak more to maybe building on your comments about the economic benefits of parents and grandparents. Are there specific sort of determinants that lead to individuals, some providing more economic benefit than others, and could we be thinking bigger about sort of hybrid categories that actually draw on benefits in multiple streams instead of just thinking you're either in one stream or another?
Definitely, I think that it's important to think of people as complete people, rather than the labels and by the pathway in which they got to Canada. And the more we begin to do that, the better policy we will have. Certainly, I think some of the variables that come into play are language ability, education, as well as experience in different environments. Age is also a calculation when you look at some of the research, and there are some reports that have looked at the economic outcomes of newcomer refugees. There's a little bit of work on the family, which we've done, but I think that this is the cutting edge of where research is right now, at looking at different landing categories and looking at the outcomes economically.
Okay, thank you. With respect to refugee, sorry. Okay, thanks.
Janice, thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I would like to thank the witnesses for their input into this committee. And I also would love to congratulate Mr. Seebeck for bringing this bill forward, because it opened up the very important conversation that we should have, which was long overdue. But as Madam Kwan mentioned, I have some concerns with this bill as well. And the main concern that I have about this bill is that, in fact, it calls for super visa conditions to be carved into the Immigration and Refugees Protection Act. Which will be very difficult to bring in changes if we want those changes in future, because that's all has to be done by legislation. So I would like to ask the witnesses, would it not be a better idea that if this is brought through the ministerial instructions, that would allow IRCC to make changes as we go?
This is beyond my expertise to offer an adequate answer, so I pass to Mr. Sweetman, who may be able to offer a better answer than I could.
So ministerial instructions, in my view, are a very powerful tool of government or instrument of government, and they're very fast. If my assumption is the reason for this bill is that the minister has been unwilling or unable to issue a ministerial instruction. If the minister were willing to, then that's a very fast and easy way to make changes. Having said that, one thing that the bill does that a ministerial instruction doesn't do is that it ties the hands of future ministers. So if the goal of the committee, if the goal of Parliament is to tie the hands of the ministers, then you need legislation. There's advantages to tying the minister's hands, and there's advantages to giving the minister discretion. Depends on how much you trust and agree with the minister and all future ministers.
But one thing that you agree that if it is brought through ministerial instructions, it can change. If we want to bring in changes, that can be brought in faster, and as well as the implementation.
Certainly, and there's big advantages. As much as I'm talking about pros and cons, there are big advantages to the ministerial instructions. They are easier to change if something dramatic changes in the future. They have some real advantages as well as some deficits if you disagree with the minister.
Ramos, you talked about the economic impact of the parents and grandparents. A perfect example in my case, my parents came here. If they weren't here, both my brother and myself would not be probably able to go through the degrees at the universities. And after having engineering degrees, my brother is working for a Canadian international firm for all those years, and I have set up my own business employing almost 20 people, and not only helping us there, but culturally and in childcare as well. Like we both, my wife and myself were able to work because my parents took care of our children, and they were better raised. And my daughters still say that, when my dad was picking them up, he will be right on time, than I would be. Sometimes I will get occupied with my work. So it's, and then at the end, my dad looked after my business for all those years, and my mom is still considered a better campaigner than I am when I'm on the campaign trail. So not only in my case, I can see hundreds and thousands of those families, that brought in positive impact. And I'm a big supporter of a permanent immigration, compared to this super visa option. What would be your comments about that?
I think that it's important to still have permanent pathways, and that the super visa cannot be a replacement of permanent pathways. And so it's important, as the super visa is brought in, to try and offer immediate solutions for migrants where it will work, or for newcomers where it will work. It's equally important for us as a country to consider family migration as a viable option in the mix of our portfolio of pathways.
Thank you. I think I have only 13 seconds left. No, I just want to thank you again, the witnesses, and of course, Mr. Seabat, yourself.
Okay, thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel-Dessep for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Brunel-Dessep, you can begin.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Very interesting. My friend Suk Taliwal has just told us about childcare. We right now know that there is a lack of manpower, labor shortages here in Canada, but especially when it comes to childcare. So, Mr. Ramos, do you think that this bill might offer a solution to lack of childcare spaces in Canada? Is that something we could consider it as being?
That it's a solution to childcare needs as a whole. But one of the benefits, which much of the qualitative research has shown, and to some extent the work that we did, is that caring is an offshoot that comes. And so I think it's not adequate to see it as a replacement for childcare and investment in childcare and early childhood learning, but it's seen as a value added that supplements that. And so I think that that's, the important thing to change in our conversation is to move from kind of either or positions to really seeing the supplementary positions and hybrid positions that are the new reality that newcomers face.
Merci pour la réponse.
Thank you for your answer. If you were allowed to make one amendment, one change to the bill, if you have such a thing, what would it be? What would you change? Mr. Ramos, and then if we have time, Mr. Sweetman.
I can't say that I have specific amendments to the bill as it is, though I would stress that thinking about the LICO and being as creative as possible, thinking about the wealth of the parents that they bring is important consideration.
I'm not sure what amendment I would make. I might phase in the extension of the length of the super visa, the new stay in Canada. At the moment, it's 2 years. Rather than going immediately to 5, I might slowly phase it in over time. Not that slowly.
Merci. Ben, écoutez,
Thank you. Thank you. I'm running out of time, so I'd just like to thank you for being here with us. Much appreciated. This will help us carry out our work, that's for sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you can go for 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about an appeal process, because right now there isn't one. And I've had people who's had their application for the parents, grandparents, PR stream be rejected because they missed 1 month of their income requirement. Having waited 3 years, having, been lucky enough, I guess, to get the draw, and so that they can actually get into the system. So my question to both witnesses, and maybe starting with Mr. Ramos first, should the government embed into this system, or should we as committee make an amendment to this bill to allow for an appeal system?
It's difficult to answer that in the sense that an appeal system could potentially drag out the process even longer. It could be quite costly versus having an ability to just reapply for another visa. So I think that it's a matter of balancing out the two, which is the quicker solution for the newcomer. But certainly an ability to reapply would be quite important.
Yeah, but if the government actually, instead of making people go to federal court for the appeal, which would be very onerous and expensive, set up a system so that the officer can reconsider, or even the minister can reconsider the application, that would be a cheaper way. If you make a person reapply again, only to be rejected again, what is the point? And so I like to actually come back to Mr. Ramos before I run out of time, just on that front. Should we have an appeal system that is simpler and less onerous, and so that people have a chance to appeal their case to consider extenuating circumstances?
Thank you for that clarification. I would agree that would be a viable solution and something to consider with adequate checks and balances, so it doesn't hinge on just one officer or the minister, but maybe having a review of another officer. And I think that would be an effective way to create that wiggle room.
Mr. Sweetman, 10 seconds on that answer, I'm told.
My sense is you're asking two questions in one. There's an appeal process where the same criteria are imposed, where you're only looking for mistakes by the officer who made the decision, versus a compassionate appeal where you're looking for someone to make an exception to the current criteria, to let someone in despite the current criteria. I think you lean towards the second of the two, which is a very different process than a legislative a judicial type of review, which imposes the same criteria. I think your fundamental concern is with the criteria for admission. I'm not saying that you don't want an appeal. Appeals are useful, but I think your fundamental concern is with the criteria rather than the appeal itself.
Sorry
Yes,
for
there's
interrupting.
that, but then there's also, if I may, Madam Chair, just finish this thought, that there should be a provision to consider extenuating circumstances, to which there isn't right now.
Thank you. Time is up. And with that, our panel comes to an end. On behalf of all the members of the committee, I want to take this opportunity to thank both the witnesses for appearing before this committee and providing important testimony towards Bill C-242. With this panel comes to an end. We will suspend the meeting for a few minutes to allow the witnesses for the second panel to come in, and so the meeting is suspended. Thank you. pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 1st, 2022, we will resume the study of application backlogs and processing times. We have today 3 witnesses for this panel. Mr. Ravi Jain, Steering Committee member for the Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association, joining us virtually. Saik Shahjahan, founder and lawyer from Shahjahan and Associates, here with us in person, and he has traveled all the way from Toronto. Thank you for coming and appearing before the committee. And we are also joined by Kyle Heidemann, Chair International Law Section from the Canadian Bar Association. Thank you to all the witnesses for appearing before the committee. I would start with Mr. Jain. Mr. Jain, you can please begin. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will go into our round of questioning. Mr. Jain, floor is yours. You can please begin.
Nice to see you again. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the clerk of the committee for inviting the Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association to appear before you. I want to first acknowledge and thank my CELA colleague, Betsy Kane, who was initially scheduled to attend, and for sharing her initial notes with me. We're comprised of over 400 members of the bar from across Canada, and one of our mandates is to improve immigration legislation, policy, and operations. You know, the backlog is having an enormous effect. First, it makes it difficult for Canada to bring in people based on humanitarian and family class. Humanitarian reasons when family class and economic immigrants are also in dire need of attention. Pre-pandemic, I had family class cases going in as little as 4 months, but the current stated processing time is 12 months, and it's actually closer to 20. For spouses and common law partners, a week can feel like an eternity. Many Canadian companies are not operating at capacity as they don't have the human resources they need. The unemployment rate is extremely low at 800,000 vacancies, yet the backlog includes 189,000 work permits and 235,000 economic category PRs as of April 29, just waiting to be processed. The last census said it's not so much that we're an aging population, we're aged. Over 40% of Canadians are now old, they're getting there. 19% are 65 or older, 22% are between 55 and 64. Fertility rate is 1.4 children per woman, yet the replacement rate is 2.1. Bringing people efficiently is critical to our economic recovery, but it was already the case that we needed immigrants for Canada's long-term economic survival. We just need more working-age people to pay tax. The other problem with the late applications is the greater the backlog, the harder it is to climb out of it. We now write demand letters followed by 30 days later by federal court applications. People are resubmitting applications, and this was encouraged at the Delhi office. I believe the government must answer for this 2 million backlog. When I was in Kyle's chair, as chair of the CBA immigration sections, not in an international section, but immigration section, during the pandemic, I asked a rather impolite question, which was how many officers were actually working, and if they were finding solutions so people could work from home. I got a vague answer, and then it was revealed later that 80% were on leave at major case processing centers for extended periods. So we need to know exactly what the productivity was year by year, pre-pandemic, during, and now. Why did the TR to PR pathway, for instance, result in more applications than intended? Why didn't the cap work? Now it's cannibalizing express entry spots for this year and next. And, you know, we should analyze whether it's wise to even have cap-free programs like for the Ukrainians. Though I understand the instinct. The 2021 economic and fiscal update proposed 85 million. The federal budget, most recent, 2.1 billion and 317.6 million and ongoing. How will this address backlogs? Where is the priorities? We need a detailed plan for scrutiny. We need greater transparency on processing time, stage of applications, reasons for refusals. IRCC could invest in emergency preparedness so we can respond to the next war or natural disaster, and officers need not be redeployed away from programs we need. Accountability is key. Look at the Services Fee Act, which exempted all PR and most TR applications. We need accountability. It's unacceptable to shut down communication with applicants, their lawyers, and MPs even, as was done with the excuse of Afghanistan and Ukraine. The program manager in Delhi currently replies with her email saying, please use the web form, and ensures there's not the false impression of privileged access. Any further emails will be sent to me will be deleted with no response. So we've also been excluded altogether from new digital platforms developed by IRCC with the excuse that they needed to be rolled out quickly. Immigration lawyers are treated very poorly in this country. I've heard from top managers at visa posts and PNPs about high levels of fraud and negligence by consultants. And this has led to reps being shut out generally. The website of RSCC lumps us in with non-lawyer consultants with a warning to the public about fraudulent reps. Denying access to proper counsel prejudices many of those who don't have the sophistication, technological know-how, or access to the internet. It's counter to the rule of law in our Canadian culture, where people regularly hire lawyers in similar professions, such as accountants, given what's at stake. Immigration lawyers are best able to strategize and provide complete applications, which are often time-sensitive, such that a returned application will mean the applicant no longer qualifies. Many of us volunteer significant time and effort in assisting the department generally, as well as providing pro bono services to the vulnerable public. We deserve more respect. Finally, RSCC should have designated officers as essential workers during the pandemic so that this backlog was never allowed to develop. And I'll speak more about that later, but those are my opening comments. Thank you.
Mr. Jain, we will now proceed to Mr. Sajjan, founder and lawyer from Sajjan and Associates. You will have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you. Honorable Chair, Honorable Vice Chairs, Honorable members of the committee, thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to be here and share my struggles of the past 10 months with you. I would also like to take the opportunity to appreciate and thank the Canadian government and Canadian people for opening their arms and receiving us with such warmth and love, for which we are all very grateful. I would like to begin by telling you a little bit about myself and what I was doing in Afghanistan. 2010, when I finished studying at Harvard Law School, I had the opportunity to stay in the States. But I thought in Afghanistan I could be much useful. I could make a difference to lives of many, many people. I decided to go back to Afghanistan. After some time, I started my law practice. Very soon, that law firm that I started by myself was established as one of the best in the country. It was ranked internationally as the best law firm in Afghanistan. In addition to the routine legal services that we were providing, we were doing so many wonderful things because we believed in a better future for all Afghans. We were providing pro bono legal services to indigent people. At the same time, I and my colleagues, we were very much focused to help the next generation of lawyers because we believed the strong and better pool of educated lawyers will definitely make a difference in the country. That's why we were involved in so many trainings, that we were doing it by ourselves to lawyers, to law schools. We were sponsoring different events where we were providing opportunities to the students in Afghanistan, and at the same time, we were providing so many internship opportunities for both female and male lawyers in the country. But then there is a time that we see that our dreams for a better Afghanistan is shattered. We see that there is no hope. Not only that, but we found ourselves to be in danger. And that's the time that I heard about Canada's evacuation plan. I got in touch with several people that I used to work with. They were all very kind and supportive. They said that, yes, of course, you and your people, you would fall under that definition of enduring relationship with the government of Canada, and you should apply as soon as you can. We asked for the necessary recommendation letters. We got it very soon. I believe I applied around 29th of July, but I was not hearing anything until we had this very dark day in the history of Afghanistan, 15th of August, where we could literally see that everyone could be persecuted by the Taliban in Afghanistan. I started calling everyone that I knew, but unfortunately no one was really in a position to do something. They were saying that, well, we have done what we could. We have referred the issue to the relevant authorities, and hopefully you will hear soon from them. I was lucky that I had some very good friends in the United States that they got me out of Afghanistan, for which I'm grateful. Otherwise, I'm sure I would have not been here today. They got me out with my family, extended family. We made it to Doha, and then from Doha, we started again getting in touch with different embassies of Canada, and we made it on 3rd of September to Canada. From the time that I'm here, I thought that I could do what I really need to save the lives of those who served the Canadian mission in Afghanistan with me from 2013 until this very moment. Even as of now, I would receive emails from different vendors, landlords, asking about different issues that they have with the Embassy of Canada in Afghanistan. But to this date, there is no progress from the government side. In October, I decided that I should take this issue to media, so hopefully I could have some sort of attention and I would get the desired results. I had an interview with Matt Galloway on CBC that was heard by many, many people. And a lot of people, they called me. They offered to help me in different ways, to a lot of which I said thanks. And then out of which, is it already 5 minutes? Okay. Out of which Kristen Taylor from Castles Brock Blackwell LLP, she heard it. She invited me that they would offer to support me. And that's, I thanked them, and I have been struggling. I've been writing to many, many people, including many honorable members in this committee, some of whom they've been extremely supportive, trying to raise our voice. But the unfortunate thing is, despite the fact that we had the best enduring relationship with the Government of Canada, we are publicly known for our relationship with the Government of Canada, my colleagues are still in danger, and we have not heard anything from the IRCC. I think I would stop it here. I have a lot to share, and I'm sure that during the questions, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Sherjan. Yeah, you will get an opportunity to talk further in your round of questioning. We will now proceed to Mr. Kyle Henman, Chair, Immigration Law Section from the Canadian Bar Association. Mr. Henman, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee and witnesses. My name is Kyle Hindman. I'm the chair of the National Immigration Law Section of the Canadian Bar Association, which has a membership of over 36,000 lawyers across the country and whose primary objectives are improvement of the law and of the administration of justice. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today from Vancouver on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations.
I'd like to make is that backlogs are about much more than waiting. The impacts of delayed processing are profound, personal, and sometimes permanent and unfixable, and they're often about a loss of rights. So today I'd like to highlight solutions in 3 main areas. One is completeness checks, number 2 is transparency and predictability, and number 3 is equity. I'll turn first to completeness checks. When anyone files an immigration application, as many of you know, the first step in processing is that IRCC conducts a completeness check under Section 10 of the regulations. Applications that are deemed complete are entered into the queue for processing. Those are deemed incomplete, no matter how trivial the apparent deficiency, are returned unprocessed and are treated in legal terms as though they were never filed. Applicants are then required to start all over again. Completeness checks are only fair and effective when they're done quickly and accurately. When they take up to a year, as they sometimes do now, the impacts can be serious and sometimes permanent. And I'll give you an example of a spousal sponsorship filed from within Canada, where the applicant has a work permit that's expiring soon, and let's say a 21-year-old son overseas. Filing her permanent residence application along with an open work permit application allows her to remain in Canada and keep working. And it also locks in her son as a dependent. The cutoff is his 22nd birthday. If this applicant's PR application were returned for incompleteness a week later, she could simply correct any deficiencies and refile the application. The consequences would be relatively minimal. But if it were returned after 7 months, let's say, the consequences could be very serious and very permanent. First of all, because her application has been returned, her work permit application is also refused, and she's now out of status and well beyond the 90-day restoration period. Her options are to leave Canada and be separated from her spouse, remain in Canada illegally, or apply for a temporary resident permit, which is a highly discretionary application with a low approval rate. In the meantime, many of her documents have expired. More seriously, her son has now turned 22 and is permanently excluded from the family unit. She can never sponsor him to come to Canada, and she'll have to make the impossible choice between permanent separation from her spouse or from her son. And this situation may also lead to a cascade of resource-intensive applications to try to fix the situation, creating more work for IRCC, the courts, the CBSA, and other departments. There are 2 main recommendations on this point. One is to allocate more resources, whether electronic or human, specifically to reviewing applications for completeness, opening files, and assigning file numbers quickly. And number 2 is giving applicants the opportunity to correct minor deficiencies rather than returning applications. The second point is about transparency and predictability for applicants. We have 3 main recommendations that we believe will help lower anxiety, increase confidence in the immigration system, and reduce follow-up communications that consume IRCC resources. Number 1, set reasonable service standards for responding to inquiries and ensure that they're met. Number 2, inform applicants or their counsel where their applications are being processed and post information about the circumstances in which applications are transferred. And number 3, provide accurate, individualized information about the progress of applications. The final point is about equity. We need an immigration system that both meets Canada's economic, demographic, and humanitarian needs, but is also administered in a way that reflects Canadian values of equity and fairness. Our current system fails to do this consistently, particularly when it comes to processing times, which vary wildly across IRCC's international network. We've made 3 recommendations to address this. Number 1, allocate more resources to offices that face unusually long processing times, such as New Delhi and Abu Dhabi. Number 2, make better use of IRCC's global delivery network to reallocate files to other offices. And number 3, post more accurate processing times online. Those are my introductory remarks, and I would welcome any questions from members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to our first round of questioning, and we will begin with Mr. Hallen. Mr. Hallen, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Shudjan, you work for the embassy, correct?
Yes. My law firm, we had an agreement, in fact several, from 2013 until December of 2021.
Okay, and what was your experience during that time? Can you explain a little bit when Kabul was falling, if we can get a little bit more information on what your experience was dealing with IRCC before the fall and then after the fall?
Well, honestly, I have no words how to describe that. All what I would say is there is no transparency, there is no clarity in the process. I know the country very well. I know who was working with the embassy in Afghanistan. I could literally see people or organization that was established as early as 2 years back from the time of collapse, or even less than that. They got out on those evacuation flights from Afghanistan.
When was that?
Well, so this was happening right from beginning of August until, I believe, until 27th of August. People that they had received a small amount of donation or funding from the government of Canada and Afghanistan back in 2008, 2012, they were getting out. Us, that we were publicly known, I've got the reference letters that would confirm that we are publicly known for our affiliation and representation of the Embassy of Canada. To this date, we have not heard anything from the IRCC. Not only myself, but so many of my colleagues that they were representing the embassy before different ministries, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Interior, Presidential Palace, National Security Council, local courts in Afghanistan, municipalities in Afghanistan, dealing with landlords, dealing with local vendors. We are all publicly known, and this is a time that you cannot really trust anyone that who can go to Taliban and report you that I know this guy, he was working with the Canadian embassy in Afghanistan. And here we are, as I said, there are people that they had no ties with the Canadian government in Afghanistan. They're already out, or at least they've received G numbers. But in our case, those poor people that are still in hiding, it is 10 months, right? I'm not talking about normal routine immigration thing, which I understand. It's time consuming. They need to do a lot of work. But here, people's life is at risk. They're in danger. They're in hiding for 10 months. And I'm afraid they would not be able to do this for too long. And as I said, honestly, I have no word. How it is done, who is getting out based on what is really the criteria, how those decisions are made, I have no answer for that.
Thank you for that. And that's something that we keep hearing. What you mentioned about no transparency, this is a huge issue with the translators and the people who serve Canada, the Afghans who serve Canada. This is what we keep hearing. We know through testimony in the Afghan committee that UNHCR had prepped or at least told the government that there was a fall was imminent, that it was going to happen, and the government didn't take any steps towards that. Did you hear about anything in your time there before August about any type of an evacuation, or if something was going to happen? Did you see any preparations being done by the government there, the embassy, for an evacuation?
Well, so I found out about that late, I think it was in July, where I heard from different colleagues that we were working with within the Canadian embassy that this is what the government of Canada is doing. And this is the time that I inquired from different contacts that we were working with that whether we would be eligible or not under this. So I understand that there was this evacuation going, and again, I don't have the answer that what is the definition of enduring relationship that was relayed so many times by two different ministers that the priority would be given to those that they had enduring relationship with the government of Canada. I thought that we would be like the best people under that category, because oftentimes we were representing the embassy more than the local staff, or even at times than the diplomats. For security reasons, often they would not go out. So it is us to go engage with different municipalities, with local courts, local offices within the government of Afghanistan. We are publicly known, so I thought that we are the right people under this definition. And again, here it is, 10 months, and I'm asking you people to be my voice, and let's get these people that they really serve the Canadian mission in Afghanistan, bring them to safety.
I think you raised a really good point that, yes, like that's why I asked in the beginning, did you work for the embassy? In my opinion, you're clearly someone that should have fallen under that program. But in your opinion, given the timeline and now the record of this government, do you see that there's a timeline or hope for the other people that are stuck? Because we see only about 36% of the people that they promised are here. And yet we see the immigration minister patting himself on the back for that. But we hear different stories from the people who are stuck there or running from the Taliban. So in your opinion, what do you say about the timeline of people getting here, and do you see hope for the rest of the people?
Well, I'm afraid I'm losing my hope for the rest of the people right now. But with regard to the timeline, there is a time that I have seen many people that they even shared their documents with me, that they submitted their application, let's say on 17th of August. They got their G number and everything 19th, 20th of August, within 2-3 days. And then within a week or so, they were on their way out of Afghanistan. So certain cases, and still, I can tell that they had not that kind of relationship that we have had with the Embassy of Canada. They were out within 2 weeks maximum during August. Certain cases like us, we are still waiting. It is 10 months.
Certain veteran groups and us, we've been calling on single journey documents for people to help speed up this process, because we know there's a bureaucratic mess right now in IRCC caused by the government. Do you think that it would help for people to get here?
Sorry for interrupting. Your time is up, Mr. Hallan. Yes, quickly, like 10 seconds.
Definitely. There are many ways. Of course, the way that the government is going right now, it is not really helping, unfortunately. So there are many ways that we can really
Sorry
help
for interrupting. Time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Ali. Mr. Ali, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all witnesses for being here for their time. My question is to Mr. Hedman. The Canadian Bar Association Immigration Law Section's brief on the modernization of client service delivery, in its section on program issues, recommends implementation of a system for routine requests for additional information on intake and triage with reasonable deadlines to facilitate processing rather than unnecessary refusal of applications, suggesting that this would assist in reducing inefficiencies. Could you expand on this issue? Could you give us examples of situations in which this might arise? How would this approach work in practical terms? What efficiencies might this generate? There's a 3-4 question in it, so I just wanted you to expand on it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. And just to clarify, we're really talking about returns of applications, not just refusals of applications. So these are the Regulation 10 completeness checks that have very severe impacts on people. These checks are fairly ruthless. The most trivial apparent deficiencies result in applications being returned, which means that they were never legally filed. So allowing applicants the opportunity, even a very short fuse opportunity, to correct minor deficiencies or sometimes perceived deficiencies, maybe the document is in there or it's not there for a specific reason, allowing applicants to correct those and address those would avoid a lot of grief for applicants and also avoid a lot of sort of spin-off applications and other steps that applicants need to take if an application is returned. And, looking for examples, well, there's the one I noted in my intro, but that's a very real life example, and I've experienced that in my practice and many of my colleagues have, where people have permanently lost rights to include children, or they no longer qualify for a program because an application has been returned many months after filing. And that in turn creates a cascade of other applications to try to address the issues. So it's really about targeting resources, not even necessarily about applying more resources, but targeting resources to limiting those completeness check returns and doing them more quickly would actually reduce work in the long run for IRCC.
Thank you, Mr. Hinman. The Canadian Bar Association Immigration Law section's brief on modernization also refer to the situation of application refusal letters that are very cursory on the reason for refusal and recommends more specific refusal letters. Could you expand on this issue? What would be the possible benefits of having visa officers provide more fulsome reason for refusals? Are there any efficiencies which could result?
Certainly. Currently, most refusals are pro forma. They're a form letter, perhaps with something checked off, often with nothing checked off. So applicants are really given no insight into why their applications were refused, which means that they don't have an opportunity to address whatever perceived deficiency there was. And so if they decide to file another application, if they even have a right to file another application, they may not be addressing whatever deficiency there was without, for example, doing an access to information request and getting a copy of the GCMS notes. There are all kinds of extra steps that applicants need to do, and those extra steps take resources for IRCC. So giving clear and complete reasons for refusals will reduce some of those extra steps, may actually reduce follow-up applications if the people genuinely don't qualify, will reduce people going to federal court, because I'm aware of lawyers who will go to federal court simply to get the reasons for a refusal. And that obviously is incredibly resource intensive for the courts and IRCC, and not a good use of anyone's resources. So certainly there are efficiencies to be found there.
Great, thank you. Mr. Hinman, the Canadian Bar Association Immigration Law Section brief on processing time recommends that IRCC prioritize the reduction of lengthy processing time for work permit application at visa offices such as New Delhi and Abu Dhabi by increasing staff or mobilizing IRCC processing resources in other locations to eliminate processing time disparities regionally and to ensure that processing time remains standard globally. Could you expand on this? What gave rise to this recommendation?
A number of things have given rise to that, but certainly we've seen really, I think, difficult to justify disparities in processing times for work permits and for other types of applications across the global network. And there are some real equity issues there that I alluded to in my opening statement. New Delhi is a sort of a chronic offender here with extremely long processing times for work permits. And as Mr. Jain alluded, really no way of communicating with the visa office on these long delayed applications. So it just sort of creates anxiety and often constant follow-ups and as you mentioned, sometimes even mandamus applications in federal court to try to get applications moving. So that's where this comes from. In terms of addressing it, the global network is supposed to be able to distribute applications in a way that that spreads out the processing times and uses resources more efficiently. So we would certainly advocate for more of that, both for an efficiency.
Sorry for it. Yeah, you can complete your sentence, please.
Both for efficiency and for equity reasons. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel-Dessep. Mr. Brunel-Dessep, you can please begin. You will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. A special thank you to Mr. Sajan. It's very disturbing what you're telling us, Mr. Sajan, what's occurred. It's very disturbing. A G7 country, what you're telling us about Canada, very disturbing. Thank you for being here to talk to us. Given that you are one of the rare people who has actually experienced such a difficult situation and you're actually here before the committee, what do you think that Canada knew before Kabul fell? And what Canada didn't do based on information that it did have?
Well,
It's a very difficult question that to answer what Canada knew about it, but I'm sure there were embassies that they knew that things are going to be very different and difficult in Afghanistan. We could also understand that there were reports coming in that things could be very difficult in Afghanistan because the Taliban were making advances in different provinces and outside Kabul. But still, there was hope that at least Kabul would stand and resist for some time. But all of a sudden, we saw that Kabul fell. And honestly, no one was really prepared. And I think the government of Canada would be no different to that. But at the same time, when we were talking about if things are really getting tighter on people who assisted the Canadian mission in Afghanistan, I think that was the right time to kind of like really when they saw it, July, I think it was not late. But at the same time, we could have continued. We can still do much better than what is going on right now to really help those people, to get them out and make sure that they're not in danger, which unfortunately, I do not see that. Of course, the government of Canada is doing, but it's not really enough.
Vous nous avez dit beaucoup de choses.
You have said a good deal about what should have been done but wasn't. Is there anything else that you would like to add, share with the committee? What should have been done that wasn't done for Afghan refugees?
Done was when it was announced that there would be 40,000 visas for Afghans that they had an enduring relationship with the government of Canada, right? So the way that it was announced that the priority would be given to those people, honestly, we do not see that. If you look at IRCC's website right now, the figures that you see there, people who had an enduring relationship is far lesser than the number of people that they're brought to safety on humanitarian grounds. I think this is not really serving their purpose. Of course, you need to help so many people from different communities. That needs to be done. But at the same time, priority should be given the way that it was announced, the way that this legitimate expectation was given to the people, that if you had this enduring relationship, you will be held by the government of Canada. That's what, unfortunately, we are not seeing. So we are seeing now that the CIMM is limited to only 18,000, which I think that needs to be increased. So that 40,000, the way it was announced, priority not only should be given to those, but I think that most of those 40,000 should be given to people that they had an enduring relationship with the government of Canada. And of course, there are many, many other people from different sectors of life in Afghanistan that they are in danger. They deserve to be helped, which, of course, that needs to continue. But at the same time, people like us, people who serve the Canadian military in Afghanistan, they are in danger. So you could imagine I'm here, right? I'm raising my voice. I'm doing whatever I can. Honorable MP Kwan, she raised this issue on 2nd of May with Minister Jolie, where I thank her for that, where Minister Jolie said that it has been deferred to the IRCC. As all, we do not have anything from the IRCC. I think at the highest level that we could, Honorable MP Chong raised that, asked a question from the Prime Minister on 11th of May, that what happened to these people? As well, we haven't heard. So many other honorable MPs that they were supportive, they have been supportive. So that's the level that I can get here. Still, there's no progress in my case. But what about those people that they're in Afghanistan right now? They do not have access to internet. They cannot get in touch with anyone. They have no means of raising their voice to people in Canada to get the necessary support. So you can imagine that how difficult it is for those people. The way that I'm struggling for the past 10 months with all the support that I have from castles, from honorable MPs in this House, I get nothing done.
Merci. Je voulais vous laisser la parole.
Thank you. I wanted to leave the time to you. Thank you for your answer. Mr. Hindman and Mr. Jain, when you hear people speak this way, I mean, many people tell us session after session after session, whatever the study we're undertaking as a study, that immigration needs to be rethought. Do you agree with that? An in-depth revamping of IRCC. What do you think? 30 seconds each.
My translation is not working, but I did take French immersion, so I did understand your question. I take it to be about an ombudsperson, and I do think that's a good idea. I mean, so far we've been talking about, applications, not returning them more quickly if they need to be, more fulsome reasons. These are things that are generically have been problematic with the system for many, many years. Today, we're talking about backlogs. And I think that we need to understand how this backlog was able to be created in the first place. You know, we're talking about a ridiculous number of officers that were on leave. 80% were on leave for over a year. Why was that allowed to happen? That's my question. We need to have more accountability, more transparency, et cetera. Over to Kyle.
Thanks. And I agree with what Mr. Jain has said. Certainly backlogs are a real problem now, but they're not new. I've been practicing immigration law for 22 years, and there's not been a time during my career where there have not been major delays and backlogs under every government. So I think we really want to focus on solutions, and that I think comes partly from more resources, but also comes from applying resources more intelligently. So whether it's not so much a rethink of the whole immigration system, but certainly a rethink of where and how resources are allocated.
So thank you. Time is up for Mr. Brunel Duceppe. We will now go to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'd like to ask my first question to Mr. Sargent. As I understand, your colleagues has been left behind, even though their files and their applications has been referred by GAC to IRCC. And to date, you have received no information, no response from IRCC whatsoever, and it's been 10 months. And their lives are in danger, as you've indicated. So given this is where we're at, the government's 40,000 application, those numbers are getting filled up as time passes. For the people who's been left behind, would you support for the government to extend the immigration measures and to expand the immigration measures to ensure all of those who have enduring relationship with Canada and their extended family members will be able to come to Canada to safety?
Thank you so much. I would say yes. The way that was announced initially, I think, if I'm not wrong, it was said that at least 40,000. So there was this word, at least 40,000. And I think that's the time that we need to stick to that at least 40,000. That's the very first thing. And then secondly, most of that 40,000 needs to be provided to those that they had this enduring relationship with the government of Canada. If we are helping families of people, right, so that should be somewhere a different category of reunification visas. It shouldn't be under that 40,000. I think we are already, as you said, we are filling those 40,000, and there are thousands of people that they're left behind, they're in danger, and their only hope is here in Canada to be brought to safety. And the way that you see the situation, unfortunately, is worse than what it is reported in Afghanistan. People could be literally slaughtered like animals. I'm sorry to say that. There is no rule of law, there is no political order, there is no judicial order in the country in the place. Anyone from the Taliban member, they are the judge, they're the police, they're the prosecutor. They do whatever they do. Just a simple thing that as soon as they find out that you had this relationship, you could be killed on the spot.
So GAC refer files are lost in the system with IRCC. The Department of National Defense files are lost within the system of IRCC. People's lives are lost from the Canadian government's point of view and those who serve the country. At this juncture, one of the issues that people have said to me that is a huge barrier is the issue of biometrics. It's impossible for people to do biometrics in Afghanistan. What's your recommendation to address that issue? Should the government, the Canadian government, bring people to safety and then do their biometrics in Canada?
I think that's what many other countries are doing. I think that's very easy. If there is a will, there is always a way of doing it, right? We see countries that they're taking people out of Afghanistan to a third country, to Pakistan. They're taking them out to Doha, right? They're taking them out to UAE. Why not the Canadian government is doing the same, right? Get those people out to safety. Once they're out of Afghanistan, then honestly, I would not be really concerned at how long it is going to take them to bring them to Canada. Because we are not talking about a routine immigration process. We are talking about safety of people. So I think that's very important, and it's already kind of late on that the government of Canada needs to start working with different countries in the region and make sure that they get people out of Afghanistan as soon as they can. And again, the way that it was announced, the priority would be given to those that they had this enduring relationship with the government of Canada. Help those first, and then if you're helping people on other grounds, that's of course welcomed.
I'd like to, because I don't have that much time, so I'd like to turn my question about processing delays. And one of the issues that was raised about how the officials, IRCC, would return an application when they're missing something. In fact, I actually have a constituent who applied in July for a post-grad work permit. In November, they got a response to reject their application because they were missing their certificate of confirmation for their in their application. He immediately reapplied, and they have not heard back. And it's been 6 months since then, and now he's lost the job that he was promised, that he was being offered because of the delays. So to that end, this has been an issue that's come up at IRCC over and over again. Should the government stop refusing applications? Should they actually just pick up the phone or email the people who's missing the document, missing a signature, whatever it is that they're missing, contact them and get that information before they issue a rejection? To both witnesses.
Do you want me to go ahead, Ravi?
Sure, yeah.
Thanks, Ms. Kwan. And certainly it's our position that IRCC should be providing applicants with an opportunity to correct minor deficiencies or perceived deficiencies. As I said, sometimes they're not even deficiencies. There may be a legal or practical reason why a particular document hasn't been included, or it may have been a minor oversight that could be corrected in minutes. And so giving applicants an opportunity to correct those deficiencies, as you noted, just picking up the phone or sending an email with even a short deadline to correct it or to explain why it's not there, would save resources in the long time by preventing a cascade of additional steps that would need to be taken to fix it. So
but the issue, I think the issue is like, yes, I agree with everything Kyle just said. And yes, you're absolutely right, Madam Chair. You know, the point made is a beautiful one. We live in an age of instant communication. We have all kinds of access to email, a phone, et cetera. Why don't they use this? I mean, absolutely. But the reason it's taking as long as it's taking now is because there were up to 80% of people, officers, who are not at work for extended periods of time. You know, the government indicates on the Public Safety Canada's website that Canada's national strategy for critical infrastructure classifies which classifies critical infrastructure in Canada according to 10 sectors. One's titled
Mr. Jain, time is up for Ms. Kwan. We will now proceed to Mr. Redekop. Mr. Redekop, you will have 3 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to let's pick up with Mr. Jain. If you want to finish your thought, I would appreciate that on what you were just saying.
Well, what I was saying was, thank you. What I was saying was that if you look at the Public Safety Canada's website, it declares what's essential. Like for the pandemic, we were looking at what areas of our critical infrastructure for Canada. One of them is government. Within that government heading is listed workers supporting permanent residency and visas. Okay, so the Canadian visa officers and immigration officers throughout Canada should have been declared essential. They should have been made to go back to work with proper protocols, masking, etc., so that this backlog was not allowed to be created, because it affects our ability to respond to humanitarian crisis. It affects our ability to reunite families, and it affects Canada's competitiveness in terms of our economy. It's a huge impact across the whole country, and this should never have been allowed to develop.
Thank you. I just want to touch on the issue of the scope of the problem in terms of the backlog. In the departmental plan, the Minister Fraser mentioned that the plan is for between 360,000 and 445,000 new permanent residents for 2022. But if you look at the same departmental plan on page 22, it shows that every year we've failed to achieve our targets by 100,000 plus people. And they did kick in and bid extra money for that, but that was actually to deal with the backlogs that are going to be created, not the existing one. And I asked the minister about this, and of course he didn't deny these because they're facts, but he said it's normal to have hundreds of thousands of people, and he hesitated. His quote was, "I hesitate to describe as a backlog because it's normal to have an inventory of cases." And so, Mr. Heineman, I'm just wondering, from your perspective, working on the ground with people, do we have a normal inventory of cases at 2 million? You know, is the government looking at these as cases and not people? Are we trying to do too much? What's going on here?
You're on mute. Can't get it off. Okay, I can jump in if you like. Kyle can't get off mute. Would you like me to jump in?
You could go ahead if you like.
Yeah, so I mean, when I was in Kyle's role just a couple of years ago as chair of the CBA immigration section, I can tell you that it's absolutely abnormal to have this number of people in the I call backlog. Government may call it inventory, but it's a backlog of over 2 million people. I mean, this is unprecedented, and I think it's there are major reasons, real reasons why this was allowed to happen. Like I said, there was just people not working. I also think it relates to the ability of the government not trusting representatives, and I think it's because we're lumped in with immigration consultants. And that's a whole other issue, and that's a problem. There needs to be greater communication, transparency, all those things. So this is something that it really is affecting the country in every way I described. It's very problematic.
Time is up, Mr. Redekop. We will now proceed to Ms. Kayabaga for 3 minutes. Ms. Kayabaga, you can please begin.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I also just want to start by thanking our witnesses for taking the time to be here and answering our questions. My first question will go to both Mr. Hyman and Mr. Jain. I'll start with Mr. Jain, actually. You talked about transparency and accountability. We know that our government has increased the funding for IRCC. We've increased staff. When you talk about accountability and transparency, what does that look like for you?
Well, we need to know how the money is going to be spent, right? And I do applaud the government for that. I mean, there's been significant spending for modernizing GCMS, in particular the global case management system, so files can move around, like whether it's, Delhi's overwhelmed, they can move it to other visa posts. I think that's great. But it's going to take a long time for that money to translate into a new platform for the government to use to really modernize in a way that allows greater efficiency. So I think we need to understand, I think for accountability particularly, I want to understand how many officers were working, before, like during the pandemic, right after, now that things are more stabilized. Why were there problems with why weren't they declared essential? I mean, like I said, Public Safety's website said they were essential. So why weren't they declared essential? Why weren't they told they had to go into the office and process paper applications? Well, they were modernizing it and digitizing. I know there was a digitization process, so things could be pushed abroad. But the private bar, I can tell you, we had to pivot like that. We had
I
people with their
apologize to
kids
cut
running
you.
around and
just because
having
I have very limited
process.
time, I just want to ask another question. Very interesting response on what transparency and accountability looks like for you. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on what other tools can we use to address the long processing times when we've hired more staff. The system has gone back to its full service since earlier of this year, and there's still longer processing times because there are more applications and because we had a pandemic. What other tools would you suggest we use? And you did, I want to add on this. You did talk about IT. Some people have said that IT is not a tool that we should be using. What are your comments on that? Do you believe that we should be using IT systems or actually continue to increase the staff?
Well, both. I mean, both. You're right. I mean, part of the issue is that there actually are more applications, right? I see that in Delhi, for instance, year after year, there's more and more.
So what are your thoughts on the problems that we have heard that are discriminatory toward through the IT process?
Well, I think you're talking about AI, right? And I think that's absolutely right. I mean, AI can be a useful tool, but you've got to make sure that there's not discrimination happening. There's not these criteria that's being implemented in a way that leads to unfairness. So I think that there needs to be careful attention paid to that. And but I think it could be a way to help get through there's just the mounds of applications that are being processed.
Oh.
Yeah, we will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desaep for 1.5 minutes. Mr. Brunel Desaep, please begin.
C'est très peu.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes is so short. So I will just like to thank our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Sajan, here in person. And I will leave it to you to say what you haven't yet had a chance to say and that you would like to tell the members of the committee, Mr. Sajan.
Grateful. So what I would like to ask for is that IRCC needs to pay an urgent attention to the files of my colleagues, issue them case number as soon as that is possible. Then we will see that how ourselves, the support that I have gathered in Canada find ways to support the Canadian government, bring them to safety to Afghanistan. I think that's the very first thing that I would be asking for. Second, I think the number of visas that is limited to CIMM, 18,000, I think that is unfair. The way that the expectation was given to those people that they had enduring relationship with the government of Canada, that needs to be increased to as much as it is possible, right? So all we thought that the initial 40,000, at least 35 or something of that would be given to those that they had enduring relationship with the government of Canada, and then the remaining could be provided on humanitarian grounds. But right now we're seeing that only 18,000 is provided to people who had this relationship with the government of Canada. We are seeing that people, they're brought in from different cases, but they're counted under this 40,000, which again, I think that is unfair. That needs to stop. And we need to take immediate actions to make sure that we really bring those people to safety, that they're in danger in Afghanistan just because of the relationship and services to the government of Canada.
Time is up, Mr. Brunel Duceppe.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
We will now proceed with Ms. Kwan for 1.5 minutes and then end the panel. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask whether or not, through your experiences, the situation with the caregiver stream. To my understanding from caregivers, their applications basically have not really moved forward and been processed since 2019. The backlog is inordinate and significant. So I wonder whether or not the members at the Canadian Bar Association have experienced that, or what you can share with this committee in terms of the backlog and delays for caregivers.
Certainly. Thank you, Ms. Kwan. There have been very serious delays in the caregiver programs. In terms of allocating resources to that program, we've certainly advocated that the first step of getting to the work permit be done more quickly. And again, it's about allocating resources where it makes the biggest difference to applicants. It's not just about pouring more resources into overall processing. And so getting people to that work permit stage in 90 days rather than in a year would make a huge difference to their ability to work and locking in qualifying and other aspects.
Yeah, or maybe just processing their application within standard, which I would say no more than 12 months. The other question I'd like to ask is this. A lot of the folks actually had their status expired because of COVID and other implications. So they are here actually in Canada. And the government in the meantime is issuing more permits to bring in temporary foreign workers. Shouldn't they actually be utilizing the effort in making and offering permanent resident status to the people that are already here to fill those labor skill shortage? Could I just get a quick answer from
10 seconds.
I think that's probably a better question for the minister than for us.
Thank you. With that, this panel comes to an end. On behalf of all the members of this committee, I would like to thank all the three witnesses for appearing before the committee.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Janis.
Madam Chair, just before we adjourn, can I ask a quick question about the report that we have received a draft of? Could we get a timeline from the clerk or the analyst that just show if we were to try to have this done by the end of June, kind of working back from there, what we would be required to do in order to meet that timeline? Does my question make sense?
Can you please repeat?
We have a draft report, and I'm just wondering if we want to table that draft report before we break for the summer, assuming we break at the regular time, if that's possible at all, what kinds of benchmarks or timelines do we have to be aware of in order to have it ready in that timeline?
The differential outcomes?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So just for the information of all the members, Thursday's meeting is scheduled to be clause by clause on Bill C-242, and then the week after that, the week of June 13th, 16th, and 18th, we will be going through the consideration of the draft report. So it will be up to the members how long they take it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so my question is, and maybe if we don't have the answer now, if we can just receive in advance so we know, hypothetically, what day would we have to finish that review by if we want to see the report tabled before we break for the summer?
Okay, I'll find out and get back to you next time. We have a hard stop now, and we have to adjourn the meeting. So the meeting is adjourned.